This is the Atari 8-bit podcast.
They were either, depending upon how you want to look at it, very generous or very foolish with their money. It's not so much about the hardware, I think, as the people.
I'm Kevin Savitz, and this is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. Arlan Levitan wrote for many computer magazines, including Creative Computing and Compute, where he wrote the Telecomputing Today and Levitations columns. He helped design the menu system and feature set for the AMIS bulletin board system and hosted the first AMIS BBS at his house. He was heavily involved with MACE, the Michigan Atari Computer Enthusiast user group, and wrote the book The User's Guide to Atari 400, 800, 1200 XL Computers, Software, and Peripherals. This interview took place on December 10th, 2015. Where should we start? Tell me the very beginning, why you became a writer, and how you got interested in computers, why you started writing about computers.
I started writing about computers as a result of being involved with the Michigan Atari Computer Enthusiast, or MACE, as it was called at the time. And we had a relatively small newsletter, but as the group grew, it was serendipity because a gentleman named Fred Parr joined the group as well, and his dad owned a professional publishing company. So the 4-page, folded over, printed on an Atari 825 newsletter became a 32-page glossy in about a year and a half. And I was editor when we made that change, and with 32 pages of content to fill, as anyone who's been involved with newsletters knows, you end up writing a lot of it yourself. And I had been writing for a while, probably about 6 months. We'd been sending the newsletter out on a regular basis to Compute, Creative Computing, Byte, and other magazines. And a product came out for the Atari 800 called a Full View 80. And it did something truly amazing. It allowed you to have an 80-character screen rather than a 40-character screen. And since I was working in tech support for a telecommunications company at the time, having an 80-character screen would be something that I thought was really cool because I didn't have a bisynchronous terminal at home. So I said, maybe I can get the Atari to do this. Mm-hmm. The only question was how to pay for it because it was $350. So I called Creative Computing. I got a hold of the editor, a gentleman named John Anderson, who eventually became a very, very dear friend. Unfortunately, he was killed in the San Francisco earthquake. But I started to introduce myself, and he said, you don't have to introduce yourself. I know who you are. You write those smart, blank articles criticizing Atari Corporate. And I go, yeah, I do. He says, well, what do you want to do? I want to write an article about this board so I can buy it. He says, sounds good to me. And that's how it started.
Nice.
So from there, I went on to writing reviews for 6502 Journal, Compute, Creative Computing I continued to work for, Game Player. I've honestly forgotten more of the magazines I wrote for. I got out my files and I was looking at some of the old articles and I said, I don't remember writing for them, but I guess I did. So it was essentially, it was fun. And I got into punditry. I'd been reading Steve Ciarcia and John Dvorak's columns, and I was thinking, that's not so funny. I can be funnier than that. So that's why I started writing satirical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that eventually landed me some columns on the back pages of Computer Shopper, Compute, some other places. So it was really just fun. Was all it was, and it helped pay for toys.
Right.
Because I always had a day gig, and it was actually and I understand it more now. There were a lot of freelancers who that's how they made their living was writing, and I was like doing it on the side and doing very well, and some of them, not all of them, just some of them thought I was like taking bread out of their mouths or something. It was an odd dynamic, but nonetheless, it was a lot of fun. But I had been involved with video games since the 2600 came out, when it was first sold at Sears, and had a number of titles for that, and had been in '79 was thinking to myself, okay, I'm going to make the plunge. I had a bunch of friends who had Apple machines, and I actually went into a computer store, Spectrum Computers, in Southfield, Michigan, to buy an Apple. And like 2 days before, they had received their first shipment of Ataris. And Dick Breidenbach, the owner of the store at the time, said, "Hey, Arlan, I want to show you something." Well, you can guess what he booted up on the 800. Star Raiders. It was, game over, man.
Yeah.
So from there, it was a love affair with the, in some ways limited, but still incredibly cool Atari 800 and its subsequent progeny. But, there were lots of little side trips with MACE. One of the things that, and we had talked about this earlier, that we had lamented was the fact there was no Atari-based bulletin board system. And I got to talking with a gentleman named Tom Giese, who was a programmer during the day, and he was a member of MACE, and he was like, well, this shouldn't be too hard, but we need an interface. Now, this leads into a discussion of the Atari 850, the dreaded Atari 850 interface, which everyone had been waiting for a long time because everybody wanted to hook a printer up with a Centronics interface. But we wanted it for the serial interface so that we could slap a modem on it. So I bought the very first 850 that made it into the Detroit area and took it home, going through the manual. The manual had a very simple basic program that you could type in to talk to a modem. It was only like 8 lines of code, and typed it in, ran it. It didn't work. I could see I think I had a Hayes Smart modem at the time. I could see the commands, the letters being echoed back to the terminal, but modem wouldn't dial, couldn't receive anything. And so I talked with some guys where I worked, and we were mystified. So we called Atari, and we got a hold of, was it Scott? I think Scott Scheiman, who had actually written the firmware for the device, and said, Scott, calling about this interface. You know that basic program that's in the manual? He goes, yeah. I go, have you ever tried it? He says, well, no, but it's a pretty simple program. I said, guess what? That stuff don't work. And he goes, you're kidding. I said, no. He jumps on his machine, he's typing it in, and he goes, good grief, you're right. This doesn't work. Because everyone's focus had been pretty much on the printer. So we actually worked with him, and since we worked at a communications corporation, we were able to sign out around $30,000 worth of test gear.
Where were you working?
I was working at one of the Bell Corp companies at the time as a systems programmer in the IBM world.
Okay.
And so we actually, we found out that you needed to pad the blocks that you sent, and that blocks got padded by the 850 when they were received as well. And that's a bug that stayed there forever, and everyone just programmed around it. So it was one of my first wonderful experiences with Atari support. But hey, we were all winging it to a great extent. But most of the folks there were pretty good. And as things worked out, I ended up moving from the Michigan-based Bell Company to working for a company called Amdahl, which was located in Silicon Valley. So as things turned out, I had a lot of time in the 80s to go back and forth on Amdahl's dime, and in the evening got to hang out with a lot of the folks on Borregas Avenue. And it was a good time. It was a good time.
All right, I need a story. Who'd you hang out with, and what shenanigans did you get up to?
The places we would go, and this is, everybody knows who Fry's is today. I mean, huge electronics giant.
Sure.
Well, at the time, it was actually a grocery store chain in California, and that happened to carry things like diskette drives and some electronic parts on the side. And they had the stuff located right next to the munchies that at 11 or 12 at night you wanted when you were working on projects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's how Fry's started, but there were some other places called, I think our favorite was called Weird Stuff.
Oh, yeah, Weird Stuff Warehouse.
And back then, it was actually a warehouse full of weird stuff. If you needed like old, they had like piles of old IMSIs, Kims, Sols, all kinds of stuff just piled up. And there were parts of the warehouse that were roped off. And I remember the sign across the chain, it said, "Too weird, don't go in here." And there was also, they'd have piles of stuff. Weird stuff, $3 a pound. Really weird stuff, $4 a pound. And I know it evolved eventually into a retail operation, but it truly was a salvage place. And there were other places, boy, what were the names of some of those? I mean, there was, Lockheed was right across from Atari, and there was a salvage place we could go, and you'd walk in and, in the counter, there'd be like a heat sensing array from an air-to-air missile. And not really usable, but cool thing to have.
Nice.
But it was mostly, I didn't really hang out with the execs. Most of those guys would hang out at a place called the Rusty Pelican, which was a bar in Sunnyvale, San Jose. But I got to meet and hang out with when they were in town. I don't know if you remember a gentleman named Chris Crawford.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cool guy. He had a great. He had a gas station shirt that had a patch on it that said Chris, and underneath that it said quantum mechanic. It was pretty fine. Some other guys, good grief, like Ashby Wolf. No really big names. Most of the names that actually became well known within communities were guys who had been with the MACE group. I know I mentioned Sheldon Lehman to you. That's where I met Sheldon. He won one of the first Atari Star Awards.
Yeah, he wrote Inst Edit.
Yep, character generator, character editor.
Yeah.
Player Missile Graphics, yes. And then Craig Chamberlain, who wrote Pokey Player, was also a member of the group. And we had a resident game demo kid. It's funny because I just got contacted by him. At the time, he was 8 years old. His name was Eric Choden, and he could play Missile Command like nobody's business. And now he's a corporate lawyer. And you get, people contact you all the time through Facebook and LinkedIn. And they were good times. But the most fun times I had were at the trade shows. And the only way to have fun at a trade show like Comdex or Consumer Electronics Show, it's funny because Comdex was the big show then, and Consumer Electronics was fading, and then now it's cycled back, and CES is big. But if a computer manufacturer wanted to be taken seriously, you had to go to Comdex. So my rule was the amount of fun that you had at a trade show was inversely proportional to the amount of time you actually spent on the show floor. So lots of parties, lots of running around, particularly Vegas. I remember as a stunt once, I was trolling for work, freelance work. So I said, well, what's one way to get attention? Well, it helps to have a car because nobody likes waiting in the cab or the bus lines. So then it was like, well, why bother with a minivan? How about a screaming yellow Corvette? And so today it's commonplace, but back then in the 80s, there was one place called Rent a Vet. And I remember it was $150 a day, but it was probably the best money I ever spent. Because I'd be like talking to an editor, and they'd head toward the line to go back to their hotel waiting for the bus. And I go, oh, do you want to ride? And you got a car? Sure. Waltz over to the parking lot, which was just a couple minutes away. And they'd say, this is your car? And I go, yeah, it's the only thing they had left on the lot. And then the conversation became, oh, yeah, what parties are you going to tonight? Okay. And that was fun. That was fun. Also, just getting into some parties, even some parties were strictly invite only. I remember this is how I met Bob Lindstrom from Computer Shopper. I had met with him when at the event where Atari had announced that their new spokesperson was Alan Alda. They did that at the Westin Hotel in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And we all thought that was a brilliant move. Then there was a huge party afterward at some place that was strictly invite. And we noticed that there were people coming out of an exit and that they were stamping their hands. And people with stamped hands could get in. And I went up to somebody, said, "Excuse me, can I see your hand?" He said, "Yeah." Shows me his hand, and they were stamping a pair of red lips. Well, there were a couple of ladies with us. And I said, "Does anyone have some lipstick?" And one of the girls said, "Yeah." I said, "Give it to me." And so I drew a pair of red lips on all of our wrists, and we walked into the front as having been there. And that is actually how I ended up getting my job at Computer Shopper.
Wow.
Because he thought it was resourceful. I thought it was, I call it desperate, but it worked. So
Nice.
improvisation.
Do you remember the party at all, or just was the party worth all the effort to get in?
Oh, it was a good party. I mean, it was like 3 floors, but I'll tell you the most amazing parties were back when the 2600 was still alive and the 800 was being starting to be pushed more. They had introduced, remember ColecoVision? Oh my gosh.
Sure, yeah.
And the Atom. There were some parties, particularly the Activision party at that CES was in the Plaza Hotel. They were in 4 ballrooms. They had 5 bands, and it was just insane. Ice sculptures. Nolan Bushnell hanging out at the shrimp table. You love shrimp. But yeah, he's a good guy. He's creative, terrible businessman, but great guy, and very bright. Who was at that one too? What's his name? Alan Kay. Alan Kay had been a chief scientist at Apple, and he had got hired by Atari. I'm not sure he ever actually produced anything for Atari, but he had a good gig. I mean, hi, I'm a chief scientist for Atari. But wow, there were 2 guys who ran user group support at Atari, and they actually got serious about it. And I'm trying to remember one of the guys' name, and I've been racking my brain, or what's left of my brain, for their names, but there were 2 really good guys who were running it. And they actually, one year, they flew the presidents of the 5 largest Atari user group out to California for the US Festival in, I think it was 82. And they flew 5 of us out, and it was supposedly to demonstrate business programs on the Atari 800 in some air-conditioned tent.
Okay.
But it was actually just a big party. They wanted to demonstrate that the Atari was a serious computer. But it was all about the music. I remember the first evening, it opened up with Mystic Knights of the Oingo Boingo, followed by Talking Heads,
Wow.
and there was someone in between Talking Heads and the Police, but I can't remember who they were. But it was actually great, and they were either, depending upon how you want to look at it, a very generous or very foolish with their money. But it was fun. As a matter of fact, let's see. Yeah. Oh, between the Oingo Boingo and the Talking Heads, we had the Ramones, and B-52s was after Talking Heads. I actually have this list. And the only thing I went to the following night was the Kinks and Tom Petty. We were all, we did see the Cars as well. I mean, it was amazing. And, you had Wozniak. Jobs wasn't there the whole time, but Woz was. And he's just sitting on this big sofa elevated above the crowd around 40 feet from the stage, while helicopters were buzzing around, spraying the crowd with water. It was hot. We were in the middle of the desert. But a good time was had by all.
That sounds amazing. Thanks, Atari.
Yeah. I mean, and those were times when there was lots of money hanging around. I remember when EA kicked off their software line, they held a party at the Tremont. That was back in Chicago. And Bing Gordon was running a big part of the show there, but it was cool. I mean, Trip Hawkins was there. Woz was there. And that's one thing I'll say is, you see Woz on these Dancing with the Stars shows and stuff. He is just a regular nerd. That's all. Whereas Jobs, only met him once, and that was enough. Brilliant guy, but I don't think he liked hanging out with anybody. Neither here nor there. But other cool, the weird thing, and do you pretty much focus on the 8-bit Atari scene?
Yeah, but if you have an interesting story about ST or anything else, I'm happy to hear it. But
well, I just thought it was
it's
weird.
Our first love.
I thought it was weird how the two companies essentially became each other. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are those who argue that
Commodore folded into Atari. Is that what you mean, or?
Well, yeah. I mean, the Amiga was actually the next generation Atari, and the ST was the next generation Commodore machine. Mm-hmm. But Sheldon bought his house on mapping the 64, not so much on mapping the ST, which didn't sell nearly as well as the 64. A little known fact. Sheldon wrote the translation for Space Invaders for the PET, 2001. Go figure. But it's just a weird business, and it's not so much about the hardware, I think, as the people. People are what made it all interesting. The crew at Compute was very much they felt like family. There was definitely a different gestalt. I mean, you had the Boston vibe folks, You had Creative Computing, which was in North Carolina. You had Shopper, which was down in Florida. Then on the West Coast, you had Jim Caporal and Antic, and most of the A Plus magazine, Mac User, those guys were all in the Bay Area as well. But they all had a different vibe, but they all knew how to party together.
Nice. So I knew you back in the day, mostly I think from the Telecomputing Today column in Compute. You've wrote that for a long time. Do you feel like you had a special? I mean, since you worked at Belcor, you were thinking phones and telecommuting all the time, weren't you?
Yeah, one of the first things I did when I became a corporate tool out of school was I was writing, doing exciting stuff like writing communication protocols for 3270 bisynchronous terminals. Oh boy.
Oh, that's hot. Yeah.
Yeah. It was mostly assembler code, but I really liked assembler because it gave you a high degree of control. But yeah, communications just came easily to me, and I thought it was a lot of fun. And I was an very early sysop on CompuServe. I mean, boy, talk about remembering weird things. 70675, 463. It's my and all the CompuServe IDs were just numbers. It's
right.
It made no sense at all.
Which SIGs were you sysop of?
I was a SIG sysop for it was the Ziff Davis and Jim. My mind's going blank. But
you know your CompuServe ID, but not the name of this guy.
What can I say? He was one of the editors at Ziff, and there was no shortage of moderation required. People were just as crazy then as they are now, and Ziff was like totally crazy about keeping the lid on Flame Wars, and it got kind of nutty. And would you believe back then, what was it? Connect time was like $12 an hour and I think it was like 10 for 300 and 12 for 1200. That was the other fun thing, going through the progression from 3 to 12 to 24 to 96. And it's going to come to me. It's a good friend, and he's going to kill me. If I actually go to my...
Trying to think. Jim Seymour?
No, not Jim Seymour. I can tell you his Skype ID is Findelgloren. but as far as, let's see, my contact list. Who knows? I can't look at my contact list. But I'm going to, there he is. Findelgloren is, well, I didn't put his name in. Anyway, he can kill me after this is all over. But, yeah, so the communication stuff was always fun. Transferring files was always amusing. Oh, interesting story, side note to AMIS. AMIS was only half the equation. AMIS stood for Atari Messaging and Information System.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you're probably familiar with FidoNet.
Sure.
Fido had a capability to promulgate key files across the entire Fido network. And we wanted to have that too. And that functional program was, when we were working on it, was the Atari Network Data Interchange Program. So it would have been AMIS and Andy, which was probably yeah, which would have been the smartest choice, but did not get finished.
Yeah, so let's talk about AMIS. You helped design the menu system and feature set, I guess. Tell me about that process. I mean, were you there when you're just like, let's write BBS software? Tell me the story of AMIS.
Well, Tom had already done most of the work on MACE terminal.
This is Tom Geis, right?
Yes, or
Okay.
Geezy.
Geezy? All right.
Yeah, that's how he pronounced it. And so we'd done that, and it's like, I'm like, well, this is fine for, one-to-one communication and transferring files. By the way, and that was one of the nice things about Atari cartridges. All that code was pretty much less than 8K. Even at 300 baud, it did not take forever. Anyway, it was amazing to see how fast 8K of code could move across the country, even at those low speeds. Anyway, so yeah, we were, I'd been using FidoNet and other bulletin board systems, and I was just like, hey, let's build a system that's like designed for humans to use. And we weren't talking about GUI interfaces, but at least let's keep it down to like, I think we had less than 10 commands, and it was, let's make it not arcane, let's make it simple to use, and that was the whole idea. It also made less code. And so we put the first one up. I think, Tom was awesome. I think the first rev only took him around a week and a half. And we threw it up on a spare 800 I had, along with an 810 disk drive that worked most of the time in one of the guest rooms in our house. And I remember, though, when we started adding, I eventually had 3 nodes at the house. And I'm sure that the telephone company, even though I worked for a different part of the telephone company, I'm convinced that they believed I was running a bookmaking operation in the house, because who has 4 lines coming into their residence? This is back in the early 80s. And don't even try to explain what a bulletin board system is to them. So actually, so the code was really fairly solid, and we had done a fair amount of testing by 3-month mark, and then we released it into the public domain, and sure enough, people started putting up systems. And I think it was like 10 years ago, I think I even ran across one that was still up and running. And it was pretty amazing, actually, considering that it was nothing fancy, but anybody could grab the disc. It was one of the discs in the MACE library, and run it. You could just, if you just had and in fact, you could do it theoretically on a RAM disk if you were smart enough to set that up. But most people just put it like on an 810 disk and with an 850 interface and some kind of modem. So that worked out fairly well. You know, that was the other interesting thing, was watching the evolution of user groups. I remember the first user group I went to in 1978 was in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I was working at a time-sharing service then that essentially sold time on DEC PDP 1170s in the Ann Arbor area. And, okay, I'm going to go to a computer user group meeting. And what it turned out to be was a bunch of people standing around swapping cassettes and copying cassettes and talking with each other. And I was like, I think there's got to be something more to it than this. And so I found a group in Detroit. MACE was already started. There were probably about 15 members. And we engineered a hostile takeover of the board and gave it a lot more structure, because that's pretty much what it was software exchange. And we put together a structured program with a legal library of public domain software that helped support the club. And we started meeting in different venues until when I left the club, because I had taken on a lot of writing by then, as well as my regular job. It had grown to almost 2,000 members. So it was actually somewhat ungainly. And, when a group is small and everybody knows each other, there are some advantages to that. Because when you get large enough so that there's a lot of anonymity, things happen like you elect a treasurer whose total work experience is working the third shift at gas stations, and all of a sudden you may find that your treasury has disappeared.
Did that happen?
Yeah, it did happen. After I had left the group, but yeah, it was that was unfortunate, and I'm sure that there was a rationalization for that, but still kind of sad. Still kind of sad. So the group meetings usually started off with a demo of new software. That's where Eric Choden or Mr. Magic Fingers would come in. And it was like we would commit strange and unusual acts to get pre-release copies of software, essentially beg, borrow, and plead it from either the actual authors or the companies, so that people could get a look at the software before it was actually released. And that was a big draw of the meetings. And so you'd have the demo, you'd have the club business. We liked doing interviews with people. We had access to some video equipment. And the club actually owned a Kloss Nova Beam Model 1, which would project a video image. And this was hot stuff in 1981, would project a 10-foot video image on a screen live from the machine. So that was pretty cool. it was also a motivation to serve on the board because each board member got to hang on to the projector in between meetings for 1 month. There were a lot of Star Wars Laserdisc parties during that time.
I was imagining Jumpman on that, or some Mule or something, you know.
Cool. We were talking about that the other day. Yeah.
Which Mule or Jumpman?
Mule.
Yeah.
Mule. Yeah, we're going. I still play games, okay? Lindstrom and I both are in town, and his wife also is
Lindstrom?
a huge, yeah, Bob Lindstrom.
Oh, okay.
He was the editor at Computer Shopper. He went on to work at Dynamics, and he was working at Disney Interactive
Okay.
for a long time. Now he's a freelancer. It's come full circle. We're both huge Xbox One junkies. We play far more Destiny than we have any right to. But seeing as I'm retired now, I can do that. Although it is still somewhat arcane. When your friends ask you, what have you been doing lately? And you let them know, well, I've been spending time leveling my Titan, Warlock, and Hunter up to level 40 and 280 light. You get those little odd looks, and they take 2 steps back from you.
Well, I was going to ask how you keep yourself busy now, but now you've answered that for me. I see a ham radio behind you. Do you get on the air much?
Not as much as I should. Still into it though, and prefer Morse code. You know, there are, and I know that there are a lot of digital modes of communication on ham radio. You've got, you had RTTY to begin with, and PSK is, and there's other digital modes, but there's something magic to me about not having to use computers with a ham radio. You know, throwing up a piece of wire, kicking back, and having a cup of Joe while you're chatting with Vlad in Murmansk with nothing between you but 2 radios and some electrons moving through the air is cool. You know, it doesn't rely on billions of dollars worth of routing equipment and high-speed fiber backbone. I mean, there's something simple and magic about that. And those are all Elecrafts. I built all those, and they come in kit form, and nice guys out of California. Yeah, but it is still a hobby that fascinates me. I guess communications in general just is something that I still take a delight in.
Did I interrupt a story you were about to tell about Mule? We got distracted by ham radio.
Oh, no. It was just reminding me of a drunken brawl that broke out in a hotel room while they were demoing Mule to us. And
What? Okay.
no, it's just everybody had been partying, and it just got, a little competitive, and people got excited. These things happen, particularly in expensive suites with open bars.
I want to hear the story. Hold on a second. I need to look it up here. The story about shooting in Vegas, shooting guns at computer shopper magazines. I heard this from Dan Rosenbaum.
That's true.
Can you confirm or deny this?
I can confirm that. And it took place at, when you're at a Comdex or a CES, back then there were certain things that everybody did, and I was always looking, especially when it came to entertaining editors who were handing out assignments, of doing things that were a little different. Hence the Screaming Yellow Corvette. And another time I said, hey, you want to go shoot some machine guns? And it was like, today everybody would say, oh yeah, I see the signs all around. At that time, there were only 2 places in town you could do that. One of them is still around, and it was called the Gun Store. And so back then, so I took around 3 editors, and we went there, and they had various types of automatic weapons you could rent and shoot at various things. Now, they typically only wanted you to shoot at paper targets, but we happened to have a trunk full of computer shoppers, and they thought it was weird, but they agreed. Then they let us shoot at some circuit boards, too. That was amusing. But it was fun. We shot a Sten, an HKMP5, a Thompson sub, and the reason it occurred to me was that I had always, not always, but since the early 80s, I've also been involved in competitive target shooting. So I knew about that stuff, and I'm still on the board of a local shooting club. And so I still know the guys at that store. And one funny thing about it, though, was I walked up to the firing line. I'm looking around. I look up at the ceiling, and there's holes in the ceiling. And I go, excuse me, but he goes, I know. I go, what is going on there? He said, well, we get tourists from countries that don't allow firearms, let alone fully automatic weapons. And they have absolutely, no matter how much you coach them, they have absolutely no concept of how to maintain control of the firearm. So, we get somebody on either side of them to make sure that they're not, swinging the muzzle in the direction of anybody. But once in a while, somebody lets it get away from them, and muzzle rises up.
Yikes.
He says, that's why we have armor plate up above. I go, okay. He says, it's unfortunate. And yeah, I mean, whenever you're involved with that sort of thing, you have to be so careful about safety. I mean, Hunter S. Thompson notwithstanding, that stuff's dangerous. It can hurt you. It can be a lot of fun. But if you don't take proper precautions and use proper safety protocols, somebody can get hurt. That's no fun. But it was a hoot, absolutely shredding copies of Shopper. I mean, you got to remember, back then, Shopper was thick enough to classify as a deadly weapon. So that was a fun thing to do. Nice. We also would do midnight runs out to Boulder, Hoover Dam, Boulder City. And back then, you could actually drive and park. This is obviously pre 9/11. You could park on top of the dam, right next to the rail, get out and look down. I had always threatened to bring a bowling ball sometime and just let it roll down the concave surface, but that was fun too. Road trips were always good. Used to take people out to Red Rock Canyon, where a lot of people still don't go. I actually live out by Red Rock Canyon now. It's about 15 minutes from the Strip, and it's like you're in another world. It's absolutely beautiful. So Vegas is a strange combination. It is an amalgam of both the profane and sacred. If you know where to look, I mean, if you just hang out on the Strip, it is what it is. People come to town and I say, well, what do you want to do? Oh, let's drive up and down the Strip. And I'm like, why? Do you enjoy moving at 2 miles an hour while drunken fools yell and scream at each other? No. But there's a lot of great entertainment in town. There's a lot of good people. And, you know, I have the same rule pretty much like trade shows floors with the Strip. You can have a great time in Vegas if you assiduously avoid spending time on the Strip itself. I mean, most people don't realize there are almost always two entrances to the various properties on the Strip. There's one entrance on the Strip, and there's also a back way in, which the locals always use. It's easy to get in and out. They have their own valet parking, and you don't have to deal with the madness that's going on. So
there you go. There's your Vegas travel tips from AtariPodcast.com.
Yeah, and great food, particularly. I mean, you can find fabulous cuisine on the Strip at a silly price. You can also find incredibly great places off the Strip at very reasonable prices. My wife's favorite is a local place called Comex. It's Korean-Mexican fusion. And it sounds strange, but boy, it tastes good. Awesome. But great sushi, great steaks, all kinds of neat stuff. Good barbecue, too. So you're up in Portland, right?
Yes, I am.
I have to ask, is there any truth or semblance to the first episode of Portlandia?
It's been said that Portlandia is a documentary. It's kind of true. Yeah. And the more that, and it becomes more and more, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, I think. You know, Portland gets weirder as the show goes on. So there's definitely some truth to what you see on that show.
Yeah, I almost went to work for a place based in Portland. So there, but for the grace of some programmer in the sky, go I.
No, I love it here. It's great. Did you write a book called The User's Guide to Atari 400, 800, 1200 XL Computers? Because I don't have it, which is odd. And then, I don't know, I found a couple of references to it, but the internet says it's only 80 pages, so I don't know if this thing really exists.
Oh, yeah, that's actually an interesting, embarrassing story. And I was contacted by Consumers Guide, not Consumers Reports. Everybody assumes it's Consumers Reports. But no, it was Consumer Guide, which I think they're still in business. And I had a editor who was a great guy. His name was Stu Reiner. They wanted me to write this. They had already done some books for other computers. And can you do this? And I looked at it and I said, not my idea of a great book, but yeah, I can do it. And they said, great, we'll have you, are you coming in for CES? Or it was either CES or Comdex. And I said, yes, I am. Well, we'll have you meet with the publisher. Great. So I had an appointment. I was made the mistake going down on the show floor for my appointment. And the guy blew off the appointment. And his executive assistant called me and said, "We're really sorry. He was the publisher was in an important meeting and he couldn't leave. How about tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.?" Okay, I can do that. So I went down at 9 a.m. And you want to take a wild guess?
He didn't show up.
Didn't show up. So I said, fine, I don't need to deal with this. Did the rest of the show, went home. 2 weeks later, I get a call from Stu Reiner. He goes, "Arlan, how you doing?" I go, "Stu, I'm doing well. What's up?" He goes, "How's the book going?" I go, "What book?" He goes, "The Guide to the Atari 400-800. I'm going, "Hey, man, didn't meet with the publisher, never nailed down terms, blew me off twice. As far as I'm concerned, it's a dead project." And he went into a remarkable simulation of the mad scene from Aida. And after I calmed them down, I said, "Look, I'm sorry, but didn't hear from anybody. And I really don't have time." "Well, you got to do it. You got to do it. We've got a deadline. We got to go to press by," and it was like in 10 days or something.
Yikes.
And I said, "Well, tell you what, if you want it in 10 days, and I named a number that was, even to my way of thinking, completely obscene. And he's never going to go for that. I go, "Well, if he wants it in 10 days, that's what it's going to cost, because I'm going to have to take vacation from my job." And called me back, "No way." I said, "Okay, not a problem, no book." Beg, plead. No. Goes and talks to him again. He says, "All right, talk to the publisher. He's agreed to do it for that price, but he's not happy." And I said, "Stu, you're a beautiful person, but I have to tell you, I don't care whether he's happy or not." So I did actually take a week off. I wrote about half of it myself, farmed out the other half to 2 or 3 hyperkinetic 14-year-olds, and it got done. Not necessarily proud of it, and hopefully all of the copies have been destroyed.
No, there's one on a Libris, and I'm buying it now for $8 because.
Don't you dare! Don't you dare! It's spiral bound, and it is an absolute embarrassment.
Oh, I'm gonna buy it now for sure. Nice. Is that the only Atari book you wrote?
No, I wrote Telecomputing with Sheldon Lehman. I wrote Telecomputing on I think we wrote different versions for the Atari, the IBM, and the Apple. But something like that. Didn't do a lot of book work. Oh, we did Compute's Guide to Amiga DOS. That one was fun because, there's something weird about getting a copy of a book that you wrote that's been translated into Swedish. It's like you're holding this alien baby in your hands or something. And it's like, okay. So, books are okay. And actually, writing books is, authors are going to hate me again. That's one of my observations on writing. Writing long is much easier than writing short, particularly like at Computer Shopper. The stories that we absolutely hated getting assigned were the 600-word stories, because, I mean, you had to be concise. You had to, get your grabber in and just use every word very carefully. It's like on the web, I mean, there's no constraints, so people can just, their cups typically runneth over. But when you're constrained to 600 and sometimes 300 words, that's tough. A 2,000 word feature or a 3,000 or 4,000 word feature is a walk in the park. It's the short stuff that's really hard, which gave me a new appreciation for those who can crank out haiku of high quality.
Nice. All right, couple of final questions. Do you have any of the MACE stuff anymore? Any of the discs or the newsletters? I've scanned a lot of newsletters, but there's still several that were missing.
I went, like I mentioned, I went through my files this morning, or at least the file that I actually keep copies of stuff. And there's creative computing stuff. There's 6502 journal. There is not a single MACE newsletter, but I promised you I was going to hook you up with Sheldon Lehman.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to bet that Sheldon is enough of a pack rat that he still has them. And actually, Fred Parr, the guy whose dad owned the publishing place, might actually have a complete set of those.
Wow. All right.
So
ask Fred about that.
We'll dig it out. I mean, I'm sure it would have great value in terms of blackmail material, but they're around. They're around, and it was those were some crazy nights. I mean, you see, it was literally paste up. I mean, we were doing a computer newsletter, and we were printing stuff out when we first started on an 825, the Atari branded Centronic 737, which was an unreliable beast to begin with. But 2, 3 in the morning with rubber cement and little clips of paper, putting it down on large stiff sheets to go to the publisher with. Once we went to actually doing a magazine, the process became really kind of crazy, but fun. A lot of pizza. It's probably a couple of issues where some of the articles have tomato sauce stains that are visible, but such was life.
Nice. All right. Well, if you could send a message to the people who read your articles back in the day and used your software and your all that, and now they're listening to this podcast, you could send them a message right now. What would you tell them?
There is life after 8 bits. And unfortunately, it's 16 and 64-bit. But no, I'd like to thank everybody who's been... I have seen some stuff written about the, quote, old days that has been incredibly kind. People are very generous, and it's really gratifying to know that some of the stuff we do entertained them, made them laugh, made them happier, helped motivate them to do something different with their life. I mean, that's the best part of it.
Thanks, Arlan.
Take care.
Bye.